Welcome to Russian History with Dr. Brovkin. Today I continue a series of presentations about President Putin and his policies. And today's topic will be about foreign policy. And this is going to be the first in several because it's a huge topic and there are lots of issues to discuss. But the first one, actually today, I shall call Putin, Bush, and the war in Afghanistan. In a sense, it's a very convenient point to start the survey of foreign policy of President Putin, especially in its most important relationship, and that is with the United States. As I mentioned before, Putin comes to power in May 2000, and this is just about the beginning, that same year, 2000, Bush won elections, and in a sense, this is the beginning of the relationship, which is actually one of the most important ones, both for the two countries and for the world. So I shall start the survey with the definition of what were the expectations and the policy goals of both presidents in the year 2000-2001. Now, the main question, of course, to keep in mind is why did that relationship deteriorate very quickly? As is all known, Bush is known to call Putin a friend. There were several meetings. There was visits to Russia by President Bush. There was a visit to the United States, to Camp David by President Putin. This continued the tradition of this good rapport in the times of Bill Clinton and Yeltsin. So in a sense, it was nothing new. It was just a continuation of a kind of a ostensibly good relationship between the two countries in the 90s. And so now we have that two new presidents. You have Bush in the United States and Putin in Russia. So quickly to define the way the United States defined its objectives and foreign policy goals in the year 2000, before 9/11. This was the time when they were talking about celebrating the victory of communism, the victory in the Cold War, when America defined itself as the only genuine great power that can actually be the leader of the free world. So America defined itself, in a sense, against the Democratic Party agenda under Clinton in a new kind of a conservative, assertive posture of the new Republican administration. Now, against the Democratic policies were such things as walkout from the Kyoto Protocol in defending environment. This was also walkout from any constraints in military buildup, which, as we shall see, really very much hurt the Russians, which is United States abrogation of the ABA treaty, the Ballistic Missiles Treaty in 2001. It was also a kind of a new discussion of American century that was heard at that time, and China was not yet perceived anywhere close to being a threat or in any sense whatsoever. And Russia was defeated, Russia was weak, Russia was corrupt, Russia was devastated, Russian military collapsed, Russia withdrew its forces from all the occupied countries of this Eastern Europe, and the Soviet Union collapsed. It was like a feeling of total victory of U.S. democracy, U.S. capitalism, and U.S. role in the world. And the agenda was to concentrate on spreading American influence and democracy and so forth against the pariah states. And the pariah states at that time were explained as North Korea, Iran, and Iraq. And nobody spoke anything about Afghanistan. It was not even in the cards in the year 2000. Now, the Putin definition of the situation is somewhat different, and I'll explain what he felt. As we know from my previous presentations, Putin comes to power as a kind of a supporter of Primakov. And Primakov's most important action was that he turned around his airplane in 1999 on the way to the United States as a protest against NATO bombing of Serbia. And so this was a sign that Russia does not accept unilateral United States actions, especially bombing a former ally of Russia, Serbia, historical ally. So in a sense, the political establishment in Russia was very much suspicious of the United States and very, very critical of the United States because of the situation in Kosovo, because of the humiliation of 1994 when Russians were not consulted and thrown out of the Pristina airport, and so on and so forth, expansion of NATO talking about it, the takeover into NATO of the former Soviet satellites, etc., etc. So Russian establishment was very, very skeptical about good relations with the United States, to put it mildly, and actually some of them were quite suspicious, and at least Primakov openly in protest against American hegemony. Now, what's interesting, and people forget at this point, is that Putin turned around this hostility into a totally opposite. Once he becomes president, he does not follow Primakov policy. He becomes a friend of the United States, and he parades this friendship at every corner. Now, a lot of times is asked, why is he parading this friendship? Why is it? Well, I don't know, but my hunch is that Putin's priorities were different. His priorities were to attract investment, to put the house in order, to fight against corruption, to increase production and increase Russian standard of living. In other words, forget about foreign policy adventures of the Soviet Union and concentrate on domestic development. This was his agenda, and that demanded friendship from the adversarial relationships such as the United States. In any case, that's on the eve of 9/11. So then, of course, 9/11 happens, and it sort of changes the political situation in the world completely. Now, as some of you remember, the young people don't, but I remember very quickly. So immediately after 9/11, Bush says, if you're wearing a uniform, get ready, we're going to war. So in other words, very quickly, the American decision was made to go to war against Afghanistan. Why Afghanistan? Well, because bin Laden was in Afghanistan. But it's a little more complicated because, in fact, Taliban offered bin Laden a place which they said was kind of a gesture of goodwill and hospitality. The United States asked them to deliver bin Laden when they refused. That doesn't mean that they were for bin Laden. That simply means that they just felt that they cannot break this tradition of hospitality to somebody who is a very respected figure in Islam. Well, this was good enough for the United States to go and smash them, and they went for a war in Afghanistan. That's very interesting who supported it and who didn't. And we shouldn't forget that the first country that supported the war in Afghanistan was Russia. It was Putin. Moreover, the Americans should not forget that the first country that offered help to the United States after 9/11 was Putin's Russia. Moreover, specifically, Putin offered bases in the Central Asian Republic of the former Soviet Union that had defense treaties with Russia to station American troops to make it easier to fight the war in Afghanistan. This was real help and voluntary help, not demanded, not asked. He just did it because he wanted to send a signal to Bush that Russia is a friend. Moreover, I think that Putin's strategy was to gain some leverage over America's ambitious plans and expansion of NATO and other things that are of crucial interest to Russia through his friendship and through the support of the Afghan war. Now, also should be remembered, nobody else supported the Afghan war. The French were openly dismissive and said, no, this is American hegemony, this is American unilateralism, this is not consulting the allies. Germany under Schroeder, the Social Democrats, were even more outspoken against any war whatsoever, including the war in Afghanistan. And it was only Britain, and reluctantly, under Labour government of Tony Blair, reluctantly, only because of the special relationship, they supported the war in Afghanistan. So let's put it very clearly. Nobody supported the war of the major American allies. This is why the United States came up with this new idea, different coalitions with different missions. Nobody wanted to send anybody. They said, this is outside of NATO. This is not North Atlantic or anything like this. Uh, Putin decided to support it, as I explained, for my purposes. Now, Putin's purpose was to keep Russia respected as a great power, even though it was not at that time. It had no military, it had no capability to do anything. It was a totally, messed up, corrupt regime, which he inherited from Yeltsin. But it wanted to be consulted on major issues of the world. It wanted to preserve, most importantly, the role of the United Nations as the legal guarantor of the international relations. In other words, if something is not approved by the Security Council, strictly speaking, is illegal in the international relations. So now, we come now to the next point. So Russia supports, others do not. Bush goes to war, he wins, and wins easily and quickly. And this is also extremely important because the occupation of Afghanistan turned out to be real easy. They didn't think ahead that occupation does not mean control. Occupation means that you control the cities, but the countryside is a different matter in a mountainous country. And so the United States thought, well, this is easy. And now the horizon broadened. It was in 2002 that the conversation turned to the next target, which is Iraq. Iraq was only possible because the war in Afghanistan turned out to be, quote, easy. So then they started talking about weapons of mass destruction. They talked about, Saddam Hussein is a terrible dictator and this and that. In other words, the decision was made to go to war in Iraq. And this is a direct consequence of the so-called easy victory in Afghanistan. So in this situation, as a new situation, there comes now a very, very important de facto alliance of France, Germany, and Russia against the United States war in Iraq. Now, France, they say Chirac is so much against it because France, in a Gaullist tradition, is always skeptical about the United States, leadership role or taking initiative, especially in a war and especially against an Arab country. Another factor, of course, is that 10% of the population of France are Arabs, and maybe Chirac was afraid that a war against an Arab country, if France were to support it, would have really bad repercussions for its domestic situation. About Schröder and the Social Democrats, I would say the most important factor is that Germany became a militantly pacifist country. The new generation came to power that was brought up in the atmosphere of the fighting Holocaust and the memory of the Nazis in the 1980s and 90s. And this new generation was totally fed up with any kind of what they believed imperialist actions. There were articles in German press, NATO zu Grabe, which means NATO to the grave. They didn't want to have anything to do with NATO or with US military imperialism. And the talk was even more what would come out to be today as leftist and revolutionary against American imperialism. So that's the talk in Germany. And of course, Putin, he could not resist his own generals who would say, now that's too much. This is our client state. Saddam Hussein was a client of the Soviet Union. Now, Afghanistan maybe, because we fought there too. But no way. We are not going to be able to support the war against Saddam Hussein and Iraq. And this is an area of our direct interest. There's Syria there. There's Iran there, so we're not going to do it. So Putin couldn't do it, even if he wanted to, because of the domestic opposition. So he politely says to Bush, no, I'm sorry, we cannot support this war. And then it's very polite. I read their proceedings of their meetings, in 2003. He goes with Putin's meeting, and Bush, Putin says, this is, we have to have a joint struggle against terrorism, yes, but not terrorism in terms of occupying and fighting a war. This has to be done by the Security Council resolution, and only through that. And this is very important for Putin because Security Council resolution is the only place in international affairs where Russia still holds the special place of a great power. And so when Americans started talking, we don't need Security Council resolution, different coalitions for different missions, when they started talking, the decision of NATO is enough, decision of EU is enough, Putin said, no, it's not enough. This is going to be illegal war. And so this is the beginning of a contradiction. So I would put it like this. The decision by President Bush to go to war in Afghanistan was supported by Putin, but the decision to go to war next phase to war against Iraq did not. And not only that, but it created a totally new historical situation where two NATO members, France and Germany, two major great powers of European Union, and Russia voted against the war, making it illegal and totally, breaking the political agenda of Bush and creating a precedent for the future seeking of creating a new political order in the world without the United States domination or hegemony. So I'll talk about these issues later in the coming videos, but this is what I wanted to say about the significance of this relationship, Putin and Bush, in the context of the Afghan war. Thank you, subscribe, and until next time.